One of the most successful entrepreneurs in America over the past 50 years is going public with his fourth and final prediction about a scenario he calls America's nightmare winter. You've probably never heard of Bill Bonner, but in addition to owning an interest in businesses all over the globe, he also owns more than 100,000 acres with massive properties in South America, Central America, the US, plus 3 large properties in Europe. Bonner says we're about to enter a very strange period in America, which could result in the most difficult times we've seen in many, many years. Bonner has made 3 similar predictions in his 50-plus year career, and each one proved to be exactly right, although he was mocked each and every time. This is why I strongly encourage you to read about Bonner's fourth and final prediction totally free today. It's all spelled out in a free report we've put together about America's nightmare winter scenario. Get the facts for yourself. Go to americasnightmarewinter.com to get your free copy of this report. Even if he's only partially right, it will dramatically affect you and your money. So again, go to americasnightmarewinter.com for this free report. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show here on Stansberry Research. Today, we are talking about the mystery buyers behind the central bank gold boom. Here with me today is Randy Smallwood. He is the CEO of Wheaton Precious Metals, but he's also the chair of the World Gold Council, who puts out the reports about the gold holdings. So, Randy, what a treat to have you on. So good to see you.
Daniela, so good to be on the show with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so it's been a long time, Randy. And like I said, I'm really excited to talk to you about these findings because I read with great interest a report from the World Gold Council that found central banks bought a record amount of gold last quarter. It's almost 400 tons were scooped up by central banks in the third quarter. They haven't bought this much since 1967. So first, let's talk about the massive amount of gold that has been being bought by the central banks. What is this telling us, Randy?
Well, I think the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and some of the responses back in terms of limiting Russia's access to SWIFT and sort of free currency trading and such like that has really caused a lot of the world to sort of reconsider what the U.S. dollar does represent. In simple words, the U.S. dollar, some would say, has been weaponized through this process. And so you've got a number of countries around the world, Canada included, that of course hold substantive US dollar holdings in their central bank reserves in order to provide that stability. And I don't care whether you're friendly with the United States or not friendly or anywhere in the spectrum. Central bank reserves are sort of the core value, the core backup for every country out there. And what you want with those reserves is you want to make sure that you maintain diversity and you want to limit risk. And I think what we're seeing here is that a lot of central banks around the world have watched what happened and are perhaps a little bit more nervous about the amount of US dollars that they've got in those central bank reserves. And they're now exploring the concept of truly building that stability. And this is what we've always, we know society has shown this continued. Gold is the constant store of value. It's abject of any type of political interference or influence. It's always provided that for society. It always will provide that for society. And so I think that's what we're seeing is we're just seeing a lot of central bank movement where we're starting to question, should we be so, should a lot of these central banks be so heavily weighted towards US dollar backed reserves? And perhaps it's time to start shifting into, healthy, apolitical alternative, gold, something that can't be manipulated and can't be weaponized by any future governments. And so, I think it was almost to be expected when we saw what happened earlier on this year.
Absolutely. I think that's well said. And, the top 5 really remain the top 5. That's unchanged. U.S. still in first place. But what is interesting is that Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Qatar emerged as the biggest known buyers. Does that surprise you? Do these 3 surprise you, Randy?
No, I think that those 3 countries are are countries that are really trying to establish their own strength within their own reserve currencies, and so I think it's just a reflection. And I know there's a lot of other buying going on that isn't necessarily getting reported. There are a few countries out there that don't report. I know Russia has sort of changed their stance, and they now consider it a state secret, and they won't report what they hold for gold. And I'm sure we're seeing that a bit on a bit broader basis.
Well, this is the big story, right? Who are the mystery buyers? We know that China and Russia have been buying and hoarding gold. But before we talk about this, can you give us some insights about how the World Gold Council collects this information? I mean, is there a regulatory body that can enforce gold disclosure holdings?
No, there isn't. I mean, that's one of the advantages of gold is the fact that it is a bit there isn't a regulatory body. It's a universal commodity that's widely accepted as that measure of value, as that store of value. And there is no the IMF, of course, tends to be the main regulating authority in terms of asking for this information, but there's no forced requirement for members of the International Monetary Fund to actually deliver back that information in. It's a request, but it's not a requirement. And so most of the information that we pull at the World Gold Council does come from IMF filings. We of course have a division at the World Gold Council that does focus on providing education to central bankers, the actual people that work at these central banks, to try and educate them about the strengths and the benefits of having gold in those portfolios. So we do have good, strong relations with most of the central banks around the world from that perspective. But when it comes to the filings, it's generally we pull most of our information out of the IMF.
I mean, I would think that, you see the U.S. as the number one central bank gold holder. It's a sign of power. So why wouldn't China want to show that maybe they do have more gold than the U.S.?
Oh, I agree, totally. I think that anyone that wants to try and compete with the U.S. dollar as a central reserve currency has to look at what backs that U.S. dollar. And it's no coincidence that our main reserve currency around the world, the strongest of the fiat currencies, is the U.S. dollar. But there's, it's no coincidence the fact that it's also got the highest level of gold backing that U.S. dollar. And so people look at that as a sign of strength in terms of how are we going to compete against that U.S. dollar. And so obviously different competing economic circles, they're doing their best to try and find a way down that path.
And is it correct, Randy, to say that whatever is mined in China tends to stay in China? So that's why it's so hard to even guess a number, because whatever they're mining stays in the country?
Yeah, exactly right. China and India are the two biggest consumers on an overall basis in terms of that's where most of the gold goes in today's world in trading. And so both India and China, India's got a very strong retail and jewelry trade, of course, and there is a lot of export out on that front. But with respect to China and India, even with the gold production in those countries, and specifically China, which does have healthy gold production in country, they are still a net consumer and net importer of gold. And so anything that's produced in the country doesn't leave.
The reason I find the timing of this so interesting is I just interviewed Frank Giustra, who I know you know very well. And in the interview, he brought up the thesis and his theory that China has been hoarding gold this whole time because they're planning to release some sort of gold-backed currency as a competitor to the U.S. dollar. What do you make? And I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard of this theory. What do you make of this?
Well, I can tell you that the World Gold Council has an initiative right now pushing down that path to digitalize gold. It's called the Gold 247, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is what it stands for. Gold 247 initiative. And really what we're striving towards is to try and make gold readily accessible through digital tokens, through, essentially, as I would say, I don't think there's actually been a real stable coin invented out there yet, but I think that we may be able to create the first ever real stable coin with real assets backing it. And so the ultimate goal is to improve the accessibility, the transparency, the provenance, and the trust behind gold and moving gold around. And so we've got a pretty heavy initiative focused on trying to work with a broader group of the refiners, the banks, the traders, to come up with a system that is gold backed and allows us to move gold around quickly, freely, with confidence, with trust, and with transparency, and actually ultimately provide gold as an alternative to the US dollar. If you look around the world right now, the US dollar is by far the strongest currency. We're all looking at commodity prices and all sorts of, and ruining it. But if you start looking at perhaps the price of gold in, say, pounds or euros or other currencies around the world, it's actually doing okay. We've got an incredibly strong US dollar environment out there, and there's no real alternatives. And so I'm sure there's all sorts of groups. China, definitely would love to come up with an alternative to the US dollar as being the strongest of the fiat currencies. We think it's time for gold to actually step up and become an alternative that's not a fiat. It's actually got real value behind it. And so there's a real strong initiative being put forth by the World Gold Council right now. And we're hoping that within the next year, we will have a platform that will come out and allow digital gold to be traded freely and easily and rapidly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, ultimately to be used as a currency.
I mean, that would be revolutionary for the gold industry, Randy, and much needed modernization, I guess a lot of folks would say, that gold needs. I mean, what was the catalyst behind the initiative? Was it anything to do with Bitcoin, perhaps?
Well, I'm actually I've got a daughter. She's 24 years old now, but several years ago, she boasted to me about how much money she was making in the crypto space. But she also made a comment. She made a comment to me that really caught my eye. She said that because she's a geologist and she was actually out working in the field, and there was times when she was not connected, so to speak, and so she shifted all her money into what she called the stable coin. And when I started looking at what was being described as stable coins, they are anything but stable. They are not stable coins. They don't deserve the title. They don't deserve the name. And that's really what started the catalyst. Is I shortly after that took on the chair of World Gold Council, and we have a new CEO at the World Gold Council, David Tate, and he and I started banging heads together and came up with this. It's time to modernize how we trade gold. Trading gold hasn't changed for hundreds of years, and we've had a few modernizations in terms of the ETF being available. This is the next step in terms of making it easy and accessible to everyone, and having that provenance and that trust behind it is just such a necessary next step, and society really needs it right now.
Okay, what would you say to the investors out there, the diehard gold bugs, Randy, that like owning gold, perhaps for the incognito factor? How does can they still be private in a world of digital gold?
Oh, definitely. We're not going to limit the ability to own physical gold. This is just an option. This is accessible, but there's still going to be plenty of options for people to own hard physical gold. And in fact, I myself, I love having physical gold in hand. It's there's just something, there's strength, there's something of warmth that comes out of owning physical gold. And so we're not limiting the accessibility of gold. What we are is actually broadening it to a wider audience, to an audience that doesn't need the physical side, that is happy to have it on the digital world and a digital platform and being able to move it around easily. Ultimately, we hope to get to the point where you should be able to take that physical and exchange it into digital and back and forth as a currency, the same as a ready currency. And so that's our ultimate objective, is to get it to the point where it is interchangeable from physical to digital and back and forth. But we're not restricting that access, and I fully understand the need for for people to have that physical gold in hand, and that's not going to change.
Just getting back to China and Russia, let me first ask this about Russia. You obviously see that they're looking to have their own gold standard equivalent of an LBMA, London Bullion Market Association. Is the World Gold Council closely following that story?
Well, we've seen, there are a number of bullion marketing associations out there already. The Shanghai one exists in China,
right.
Another one in Singapore, and so on. And so, it is something that we're following. Unfortunately, Russia is a little bit tough to stay connected with right now for all the right reasons. But I will say, I mean, 2 weeks ago at the LBMA conference in Portugal, in Lisbon, Portugal, we came out with the World Gold Council along with the LBMA, and another, I think it was 14 or 16 different signatories, came out with a declaration, a joint declaration for the first time ever of sustainability and responsibility in terms of how we're moving forward with the gold. And it's the first time that the entire industry from rock to ring has actually stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in terms of a focused initiative on how we're going to move forward in the gold industry. It was quite a revolutionary moment in terms of the fact that we've had groups like the LBMA and the World Gold Council around for 20, 30, 40 years, and we've never stood side by side in terms of this. The World Gold Council represents the mining industry. LBMA and all of its memberships represent really the rest of the industry, the refiners, the traders, the vaulters, the jewelers. And so to have this joint initiative worldwide with representation from China, from India, from Singapore, from the UK, obviously, from the United States, jointly stand and commit towards improving how we deliver gold to this world and modernizing how we deliver gold to this world and stepping up on that front. It's pretty exciting. And so we're hoping to continue moving forward with this broader based group and continue to advance down this Gold 247 initiative.
Two other things I want to bring up on China. I mean, I just dug up, I was doing my research on what we do know on China. So in this summer, we know that they imported over 100 million worth of Russian gold in July. That was a 750% jump from the previous month. And I did my research back 2 years ago to 2021 when they had opened their borders to billions of dollars of gold imports. So that was a huge pivot. Again, I know it's impossible to tabulate the numbers given this information plus what they're mining, but do you think that they could possibly own more gold than the U.S.?
Oh, they've got a long ways to go to catch up to the U.S. U.S. Has dramatically more gold backing it right now in its central bank reserves, and so they've got a long ways to go. But I guarantee you that's an objective. What differentiates the U.S. dollar with respect to other fiat currencies out there? Obviously, it's backed by the United States, one of the strongest countries in the world. But the other differentiating factor is the fact that it has so much gold. I find it a bit embarrassing being a Canadian that our Canadian central bank doesn't even have any gold in it, riding on the coattails of, I guess, the United States, and I find it just embarrassing that we actually need to do that with our Canadian dollar. It's every country should really focus on having the capacity to stand on its own, and I think that's exactly what China's trying to do, and a lot of other jurisdictions around the world.
And you would think that maybe Canada, seeing all this happen, and they would reevaluate perhaps re-adding gold back, into their holdings here, Randy.
Especially for a country that prides itself on responsible resource management.
Exactly. Exactly.
It is a bit embarrassing, to be honest.
It boggles the mind. Randy, before I let you go, how can I not ask you a question about the industry as a whole? Because like I said, besides being the chair of the World Gold Council, you are also the CEO of Wheaton Precious Metals. It's been a tough time for the miners.
It is. We've seen the equity investors in the space. I mean, it's good time for us at Wheaton because we supply capital, but we can't supply all the capital. We do need investors in this space to stand beside us, and there's a real shortage of the equity investors in the space. It creates great opportunities for us to continue growing the company. We are incredibly busy. We have more projects under review than we've ever had, nearly twice as much as what we've ever had in the past. So very, very busy in that front, but I hate to say it, for the wrong reasons. Companies are really struggling to try and find the higher risk investors in terms of project development. And, I'm hopeful that we can help bring some successes to the table here, and that'll bring back some of the investors.
And here's the $1 million question, Randy, right? Lack of new projects, new huge gold discoveries. We have that, plus this record central bank buying. The question is, why isn't this reflected in the gold price?
Well, it depends which currency you're measuring the gold price in. Again, such a strong U.S. dollar. But I do think we are setting ourselves up the strength of the US dollar is not sustainable, especially to have it continuing to grow in strength. And so I do think we're setting ourselves up for an incredibly promising gold market over the next few years.
Randy Smallwood, it was really good seeing you and catching up, and hope to see you in person soon, Randy.
Sounds good, Daniela. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We'll have more great content coming your way on Stansberry Research. And don't forget to sign up at danielacambone.com to stay on top of all these great interviews. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.